Hello, Stephan here with Liquidity with a video on the topic of Sie versus Du. Why is there a formal and an informal you in German?
Liquidity.
Many languages have both formal and informal ways of addressing people. However, English only has one pronoun, and that is you. You is used for anyone regardless of how I feel about that person or what kind of relationship I have with that person. The type of relationship I have to that person has to be expressed by context, by choice of words, and also by how I say things, the tone of my voice. English used to have an informal way of saying you with the word thou. However, the use of that word thou had fallen away by the beginning of the 18th century. There are many more nuances in the German language when it comes to addressing someone. When you use the informal du for one person or ihr for several persons, you are expressing that you have a certain familiar relationship with that person, or a very informal relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're on friendly terms with that person, but it means that there's a certain closeness, a certain familiarity with that person, or that you are of a certain status, both of a certain status, that it would seem funny to actually use a more formal voice. The pronoun Sie with a capital S is used to express a more formal relationship that you have with one or with several persons. Sie with a capital S is both singular and plural you in a formal way. We even have a verb that describes that you're addressing somebody with either du or sie. So if you're addressing somebody with du, we use the verb duzen. If you're addressing somebody with sie, we have the verb siezen. Do not confuse the capital Sie with the lowercase z. The lowercase pronoun sie means they. Both capital Z and lowercase z are conjugated the same way, and there's a historical connection to those, but they are separate, distinct pronouns. They don't mean the same thing. What does it mean to use the informal or the formal way of addressing people, and how do I know which one to use? So the informal du and ihr do not necessarily mean that you're on friendly terms with somebody. It just means that you have a familiar relationship, or maybe even a simplified relationship with somebody, that you are potentially close to that person. It depends on the context. The formal Sie, the formal you, expresses a certain polite distance to that person. Adults who are not friends with each other, who have a professional relationship, usually use the Sie. It creates a certain buffer, a certain distance between the two persons. Children and teenagers most certainly use du when they talk to each other, when they address one another. It would be very unusual for a child to refer to another child as Sie. If you want to be polite, you can refer to a teenager with Sie. There's definitely nothing wrong with it. It's actually kind of nice. Also, graduating from du to Sie in common usage is a little bit of a rite of passage in German culture as well. As a useful cheat code, you can ask yourself, am I on a last name basis with that person or a first name basis with that person? If you're on a last name basis, definitely use the formal you, Sie. If you're on a first name basis, usually you would use du. However, there's a difference in how people decide whether they want to be on a first name basis and a last name basis in Germany. Germans have become a lot more casual about using first name basis and also using du than they used to. However, it would be wrong and sometimes even foolish to assume that all modern Germans are perfectly fine with being on a first-name basis and using du. When I was growing up in Germany in the 1970s and 1980s, not that long ago, it was very unusual for an adult to be addressed with the informal du unless there was a close relationship between the person who's talking to that person and that person who's being addressed. The only children that would address an adult in such a way, back in the day at least, would have been direct relatives, the children of an adult. However, even not that long ago, a few decades before, it was also not uncommon for children to address their own parents with the formal Sie, especially in upper class societies, people of a higher status, they would be a little bit more formal. So especially going back into the 19th century, it wouldn't have been unusual at all for a child to address their parents with Sie, and even married couples would sometimes address each other with Sie, depending on the social status of the people. Regardless of what you do, my recommendation is err on the side of caution. It's always better to err on the side of Sie. You can do a lot less harm with the word Sie than you could potentially do with the word du. It also shows German speakers that you are making an effort to understand the nuances between du and Sie. And people can always, and it's a lot less awkward to correct somebody, to tell them, oh, you don't have to say Sie to me, you can say du to me, than the other way around. Professional, business, official situations still very much require the word Sie, unless you're really familiar with the people that you're talking to. I wouldn't dream of using the word du to address a police officer, for instance, or any other government official. Even if you go to a store, I think it's still best to refer to strangers as Sie. Even if you're just buying a pen or a sandwich, just use the word Sie. Be on the side of caution. There are several advantages to using Sie over the word du. First, this one is of a very practical nature. It is simply easier to conjugate. So when you conjugate Sie, you're using the same form as they, and that usually looks just like the infinitive form of the verb. So here are some examples. When you use the word stehen, to stand, if you use du, it's du stehst. For the formal Sie, it's Sie stehen. Fahren. Du fährst, Sie fahren. Haben. Du hast, Sie haben. Some irregular verbs are a little bit more difficult. The word sein, which means to be, is an example, but even there I would say that the Sie form is still a little bit less difficult to remember. So for sein, it would be du bist, Sie sind. The second advantage of using Sie. Sie creates a certain distance between two parties, which sets a tone that's a little bit more polite and a little bit more respectful. 3. When you address people with the word Sie, people are more likely to be a little bit flattered than if you use du. So if you're being very polite to them and you address them with their last name and you use Sie, it just sounds nice, especially if you don't know those people. 4th, if you use Sie, you avoid potential pitfalls of falling in what I would call the platonic relationship trap that does exist in German society. So if you and another adult decide that you are on a du basis now, there may be certain expectations that are significantly higher than, say, among North Americans who are on a first name basis. In German society, if you have a certain familiar relationship with somebody, a platonic relationship, not at all sexual or anything like that, or romantic, but just close friends, people who are familiar with each other, there's certain expectations on how to behave and care about each other. And that can be a little bit surprising to people, especially from North America, where people are a little bit more casual with how they talk to people. North Americans, especially Americans, they'll just talk to anybody. They'll talk to perfect strangers and people that they've never met, and they say hello and hi to people they've never met, and they smile at people. Doesn't mean anything. So in German society, when you express yourself in such a way, you may come across as insincere and superficial. If you use Sie, you can avoid that trap as well. And also just know that about each other's cultures. And yeah, just be careful. Know both Sie and Du and the nuances, and understand that there are different levels of Sie and different levels of Du, and different circumstances, different contexts of how to use those pronouns. It can get a little bit confusing even for Germans. It gets really confusing for me sometimes because I don't live in Germany. I just visit there sometimes, and it takes me a while to get used to things, especially since Germany is also such a fast evolving, developing society. Things have changed a lot since I left back in the 1990s. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video about Sie and Du. I hope it was helpful. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like. Check out my playlists. Check out my channel. If you like it, please subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Tschüss. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Mach's gut. Bye.